So once again, when you're a church on the move, you get to do fun stuff like switch around to different locations. And, sometimes you're in a spot like this where you can hear the kids going crazy and having fun. And it's a cool thing. I think there's a lot of, moments like this where, we're a messy church. We're not perfect. We don't look pretty. We don't, have all the nice things that you can go and find at another church. But that's okay. I think the messiness and the figuring it out as we go, as God's kind of been showing us as this church He's been building, it doesn't have to be perfect. And in fact, really, when you look through Scripture, I think we have this idea sometimes that we think, oh man, like my life, everything about it, like it should look perfect. It should look a certain way. And I think part of that starts at a young age, because we look. Okay, how many of you guys are like born BG, like before Google? BG? You got a lot of BG out there? All right. Before Google. So if you were born like, all right, let's say for sure before 99, all right, we'll go 99 or down. At one point in your life, you probably, man, this is probably even going back a little bit further, maybe 95 and down. How many of you have done a book report and you used Encyclopedia Britannica? Yeah, okay, yeah. I guess it's not a book report. It's like, they make you pick some famous figure and they say, all right, go and do like a report on them. And you go to the library, and I remember my very first one. I didn't know how the encyclopedia worked, but I was supposed to, research Martin Luther King Jr. And so I look at the M's, I wasn't there. I look at the L's and the J's for junior. I couldn't, finally I found it. All right, I found the right one. And I'm going through and I'm looking, and they just give you kind of like this nice little highlight there. That was what we had. When we were doing a report back then, like, okay, how many of you guys have you've only done reports with Google? Like, I see, yeah, okay, yeah. You guys are so blessed. I mean, you're so lucky. You don't even know how good you have it. That was all we had. And so whatever we had is like, this is all the world knows about Martin Luther King Jr. right here. It's like one page, like that's it, okay? And so that was what, in our minds, that's what we thought, we knew. And so all these historical figures that you kind of learn about in school, let me just take a moment here. Let me just ruin some history for you. And some of you, you've probably already had history ruined for you. It's not too late. But I like this because now we have all this information, and now we know way more than we ever knew before. But when you're an elementary kid, everything you find out in elementary school, you're like, man, that person's a hero. That person's amazing. They're perfect. They're great. All right, Alexander Graham Bell. I'm going to say some names. You tell me what they're famous for. Alexander Graham Bell. The phone. Okay, the phone. Also, he hated deaf people. Super messed up. Right? He believed people with disabilities were defective and should not be allowed to contaminate the human gene pool. What? Should I even be using my phone anymore? I feel like I should be protesting my phone right now. All right, that's just number one. Charles Lindbergh. Flying, right? He did like a big flight. Anybody know that one? The big one. Cross the Atlantic, all right? Big flight. Flew nonstop in 1927. Worldwide hero, famous for what he accomplished. Cheated on his wife with 2 mistresses. Kept 3 families that knew nothing about each other. Okay, all right. Lindbergh, yeah, had some issues. All right, yeah. Okay, Abraham Lincoln. Right? I mean, Emancipation Proclamation, all that, good stuff. Before all that, at one point he was quoted saying, if I could save the Union without freeing the slaves, I would. All right. History is ugly, like outside of the encyclopedia, right? Like inside the encyclopedia, it's kind of like, oh yeah, that nice little paragraph there. Oh, that sounds good. That's great. Like I like, in fact, I think we do that in our own lives. We like our history just in encyclopedia form. We don't want people to Google and look into the details of our lives and our history and find out, oh man, there's more to it than just that little paragraph I thought I knew about you. Mother Teresa. Yeah, I know, right? All right, I'm going to ruin Mother Teresa for you. Okay. Did incredible things, served people, all kinds of great things. I also believe the greatest gift a person could be given is to participate in the sufferings of Christ. And so because of that, she would allow wounds to remain open on people. She would refuse painkillers to patients. Her staff would reuse needles and write off curable patients as incurable because they were untrained, and she refused to let them seek medical training. I know. The more you look into history and the more you look into some of these people that we think, oh man, they're heroes and they're great people, and man, we can only hope to obtain what they've accomplished in life, it's more complicated than we ever thought. The same is true with our faith family. Like when we start to look through Scripture and we really start to dive into some of the details outside of what we learn, when we're kids over here and we're just, we're giving kids, kind of the fun stuff like, oh man, like look at this story over here, look at this story over here. And sometimes we just kind of skip over the details because we don't really know how to talk about some of this stuff with kids, and we don't really think it's time yet. It's not age appropriate yet to talk about some of these things. But us here in the room, we can talk about these things. And we can be open and we can be honest about it. So if you want, open up with me to Genesis today. We're going to be Genesis 12, 1 through 3 to start. At the beginning of God choosing his people, who's the guy they sang the song about? Father. Yeah. Had many. Yeah, you guys, we're very confident in that one. Yeah, Father Abraham had many sons. Many sons have Father Abraham. Come on. You got it. All right. So Genesis 12, verse 1. Here's the very beginning, what he says to Abram before he's changed his name. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So there's the promise in the very beginning. It's a promise of blessing. So Abram, he's had this conversation with God. Let's jump now 12, verse 10. This is not long after. And so he has literally had this conversation with God, and then here's what happens, verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Because she's beautiful, right? Like, here's this beautiful woman with this, kind of average guy. That's what he's worried about. They're going to be like, hey, she's beautiful. We want her, but we don't care about you. Kill him, get him out of here. Okay? That's what he's worried about as they're traveling. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful, and when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house, and for her sake he dealt well with Abram, and he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this you've done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go. And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. This is Abram, back in the very beginning, father of many sons, the father of Israel. And here he is, we know the highlights about him, but in this moment, God's given him a promise, but what does he do? He lives in fear. That's what he does here. He's afraid of death. And so God has promised him something, but instead of trusting in that promise, he takes things into his own hands and he says, I'm going to take care of this. since we got to travel, Sarai, I'm worried about our protection. I don't think he really trusted God in that moment. I don't think he really had faith in God that God was going to protect him as they went into Egypt. And so he takes things into his own hands. And he tells her to lie and say that she's his sister so things will go well for them. And what happens? Pharaoh gives him sheep and oxen and cows and all these things and takes his wife, Sarai, for himself. Abram's a pimp. Sorry, that's what that is. He just prostituted out his wife. Maybe that's too controversial for Sunday morning, but I'm sorry. This is wrong. Like, you look at this. And it was a moment that he lived and he acted out of fear instead of trust in God's promises and God's blessing. Genesis 20, 1 through 18. Move on a little bit. This is like quick. We're just going through, giving you we're doing quick history together today. A little bit more than the encyclopedia would give you. Verse 20, or chapter 20, verse 1. Abraham and Abimelech. From there, Abraham journeyed toward the territory. This is much later on. He's on a journey again, and they lived between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, at this point they've had their names changed. God has said, hey, you're Abraham. Sarai is Sarah. And Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, she is my sister again. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah, but God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, behold, you are a dead man because of the woman you have taken. Like, God steps in right away this time. For she is a man's wife. Now Abimelech had not approached her. So he said, Lord, will you kill an innocent people? Did he not himself say to me, she is my sister, and she herself, he is my brother? In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands, I have done this. Then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know that you have done this in the integrity of your heart, and it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now then, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, so that he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not return her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours. So Abimelech rose early in the morning and called all his servants and told them all these things. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? How have I sinned against you that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things that ought not to be done. And Abimelech said to Abraham, what did you see that you did this thing? Abraham said, I did it because I thought there is no fear of God at all in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. It's ironic. Abraham looked at these people and said, oh, there's no fear of God here. There's no sense of awe. There's no sense of reverence. But did Abraham have a fear of God in that moment and trust in his promises and blessings that he'd given him years ago? No. He took things into his own hands again. And he told his wife to lie, to say that she was his sister once again. Verse 12, besides, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother. In the Old Testament, things were kind of complicated. It was like living in Kentucky, all right? Just a little... Sorry if anybody on the YouTube is watching from Kentucky. I'm sorry. I love you guys, all right? There's nobody in Kentucky watching. And when God caused me to wander from my father's house, I said to her, this is the kindness you must do to me at every place to which we come. Say of me, he is my brother. Abraham, when I read these passages, I read it and I think, man, he's a liar, he's a coward, he's a pimp, and he lived in fear. And I think all of us today, like we read some of these stories, and when we start to actually get down to the details of them and not just the encyclopedia version, we start to look at them and we start to think, man, they're bad, they're messed up. I mean, it's dark, right? The more we look into the Old Testament, if you start to read through, which I would challenge you, hey, we've got a new year coming up, start to read through the Bible in a year. Take a challenge, find one of those reading plans, do whatever you can. But when you start to look through the Old Testament, you start to see people are flawed in incredible ways, in sad and dark ways, in a way where a man can tell his own wife to lie and let her go and be with other men to protect himself. That's sad and dark to read. And I think sometimes we start to read these, and when we start to read them in detail, we almost get a judgmental heart, right? We almost start to look at them and be like, man, well, they got a lot of problems, a lot of issues, because sometimes we've heard all these stories about how great these heroes of the faith are. But the reality is we're all flawed. The reality is, if somebody wrote a book about our lives, and they didn't just put the encyclopedia version in, they put in some of the details, a lot of us would be pretty nervous and pretty scared to know that people would be reading these stories year after year for the rest of eternity. A lot of us wouldn't feel good about some of the details that might get included in there. We are all flawed. We are all sinners. I think that's something we miss sometimes when we read through Scripture. We just focus on these highlights, the great moments of faith, and we say, man, that's it. They're heroes of the faith, but we forget, no, they were flawed also. Because when we think of them only as heroes, we think we can never be that. We can never do what they've done. I've done too much, and I've hidden too much, and I've been living in the darkness for too long. God can never use me the way he used Abraham, or the way he used Samson or David or whoever you think that's the hero of the faith that you look to as an example. But the truth is, we're all flawed in that same way. We all live under the curse of sin and death. And we've all been under that curse. And these sins, these choices we make, they get passed down. Because you see, Abraham, it didn't just stop with him. When you go on here, look here, Genesis 26. Flip over a little bit. Abraham, he had a son named Isaac. 26 verse 1 here. Now there was a famine in the land besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar to Abimelech. Okay, you might recognize that name. King of the Philistines, and the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt, dwell in the land of which I shall tell you, sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. God gives him a promise. Just like he gave Abraham, he gives Isaac a promise. 26, verse 6, so Isaac settled in Gerar. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, she's my sister. Dang it, haven't gotten better yet. From one generation to the next. Genesis 27. Isaac had a couple of sons, Esau and Jacob. And when they were born, Esau was coming out first, and Jacob, he grabbed the heel as he was coming out. And so his name means grasp the heel, but it has another meaning also. Deceiver. He comes from a family of deceivers. From Abraham to Isaac and now to Jacob. It's a family of deception, a family of lies from one generation to the next. And right now, once again, there's people in this room that they're looking at their family line and they're looking at their grandpa and their great-grandpa or their grandma or their great-grandma, and they're looking at their mom and they're looking at their life today, and they're thinking, man, I don't want to look like that, but I think that's where my life is heading. I don't want to repeat what they've done, but I think I'm going to repeat the same things over and over because it's just in our blood. It's just who we are. And in fact, that is who they named Jacob. Deceiver. And what did he do? He deceived, and he was good at it. He tricked his brother Esau multiple times. You can read some of those stories there in 27, but I want to jump ahead now to 32. Chapter 32, verse 24. After living a life of deception, and like I said, when you go through and you look at some of it, he might have been the best liar of all three. I mean, there were things he did and things he said and people he tricked that you can see some of the stories. He was good at what he did. Verse 24, and Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face." This wasn't just any man that he wrestled with. "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. Jacob, he wrestled with God. He wanted the blessing from him. And God, in that moment, he renames him. He says, no, your name was Jacob. It was Deceiver, but now it's Israel. Which means to strive with God. To wrestle with God. Okay. There's so many moments that we look at our life and we think, man, I don't think God can fix this. I think this is too broken. It's gone too far. I don't have any hope in this moment. And if you're there right now, which in this season, I think it's really easy to get there. There's a lot of pressure, right? There's a lot of things that feel like they're collapsing all around you. You can't keep your house clean. You can't keep a job right now. Your money is tight because of how much you've spent on presents or bills. There's unexpected medical things that have come up, and there's all this stress building at this season right now in your life, and you're thinking, it's not worth going on anymore. And all he's saying to you in this moment is keep striving with me. Keep wrestling with me. Don't give up in this moment, because that's what faith is. Faith is striving and wrestling in those hard and difficult moments. Because when you strive and when you wrestle with him, it builds your faith in ways that when you're living on the mountaintop and things are going well, it won't build your faith like it will in the valley. That's why we go through the valleys. It builds our faith like nothing else can. It builds our relationship with him like no other situation in this world can. Because who else do we have to lean on in those moments? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they lived most of their lives taking things into their own hands and trusting themselves, pretending to be people they were not, deceiving those around them, But what happens after this moment when Jacob wrestles with God? His hip is put out of place, and from then, it says he walks with a limp after that, imperfect. And he doesn't try to hide it. He doesn't try to pretend that he's fine. He just goes forward with that limp, embracing the fact that he is imperfect. But he's chasing after the blessings that God has promised him. And he's not the same from that moment on. I think that moment changed him as a dad. Because if you know this, you know he's the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. He had these 12 sons, and they became the 12 tribes of Israel. And one of those sons was Joseph. And do you know about Joseph? Because Joseph, when you look at the life of Joseph, and you read through, here you go. Once again, more homework for you. Read through the rest of Genesis. Read through the life of Joseph. After Jacob has changed to Israel, and you see something is different in this generation. Something looks different from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, now Israel, and now to Joseph. Something changes. Joseph becomes a man like none of those previous generations even lived up to. He becomes a man of integrity. He becomes a man when faced with death, the same way his great-grandfather and his grandfather and his father faced death. He doesn't lie or deceive to get out of it. He trusts in faith that God's going to deliver on the promises he's given his people. He does not compromise. He does not lie. He does not deceive. He lives in truth and trust for God and his word and his promises. But it's because his father wrestled with God. He didn't give up. He didn't stop. He kept moving forward, even when it would have made sense to the rest of the world to stop and walk away. Because there's a lot of moments like that as Christians where you're going to have that moment of faith where you're going to look around and you're going to know this looks foolish. It looks foolish for me to do the things that God is calling me to do when nobody else around me is living this way. And you're going to want to give up in that moment, but he's saying, no, keep striving with me because my ways are better than your ways. My ways are higher than your ways. God used Joseph to save an entire nation. There's so many moments we think, man, I can't break out of what has been my life and what has been my family's life. But we can see it in this moment. There's hope. When you move forward and you strive in faith, when you wrestle with God, there's change that happens. And so we're not just fighting for change for ourselves. We're fighting for change for that next generation. And we're fighting for change for that generation that's going to come after them. That they can know the truth because the truth is the only way they can be set free in this world. Otherwise, we live under the curse of sin and death. God gives us a new name. You're not who you were. He came to reclaim and to rename. That's what he's done. He came to reclaim his people through his son Jesus. And that's why we're going to remember that this Christmas season. We're going to remember why Jesus came. To reclaim his people and then to rename them. To adopt them into his family as sons and daughters of the living God. Andrew, you guys can come on up. Let's close it out here. Proverbs 18:21 says, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. You can speak blessings or curses upon people's lives. The words you say matter more than you'll ever realize. The words you say, the words you encourage this next generation with, you can speak blessings or curses upon them. And I think in that moment, How many times did Jacob live under that idea that he was a deceiver, that that was his identity? And it wasn't until he wrestled with God that he was reclaimed and renamed. And that's our identity today. We step out of who we thought we were, who we thought we had to be, the curse that we lived under, and we step forward in freedom knowing, no, Jesus has come. And he's broken every chain. He's broken every curse over our lives. And we don't have to repeat the same sins that were repeated before us. We don't have to live the same life that was lived before us. We can walk forward in a new way. You're not who you were. I'm not who I was. We're walking forward, striving with God, chasing after him, knowing that we've been adopted as sons and daughters, that we share in that inheritance of the Father because of what Jesus did for us. So let's celebrate that this week as we remember that Jesus came for a reason. He came to reclaim his people and to rename them. We're not who